nervous system extending itself throughout the body has formed its own kind of body. It is not merely that the nervous system is little threads making other physical organs function. The nervous system, in order to cause function, to exist in matter or in structure, must function from its own archetype. Therefore, the organization of the physical body as we see it now depends very largely upon the impression upon this body of the neural archetype, a seal, design, or pattern. The reason why cell generation does not go on to an infinite mass of tissue is because mind and neural energy, functioning as the agent of mind, imposes boundaries, imposes limitations, distinguishes processes, and gradually begins the process of transforming or molding the body into a physical equivalent of its own neural nature. And here's where we get into perhaps one of the most interesting but complicated doctrines of antiquity, and that is this doctrine of the Kundalini Shakti and the spinal chakras. Let us then try to understand this a little better, because actually there isn't too much available on this particular problem. We would assume that the various schools of Asiatic philosophy, particularly the Yoga and the Tantra, which were closely associated with this doctrine, would be in common accord about it. But they are not. There are many branches and schools and systems and subdivisions of thought relating to the entire Kundalini mystery, even in Asia. And we cannot, therefore, simply affirm that the East was in common accord about this. The East was, however, in common accord for the most part on one subject, namely that in some way the heart must be brought back into dominion over the neural system. But how this was to be accomplished is not too clearly set forth, even in the most valid texts relating to this subject. Now, most of you have read something concerning the yogic ideas about the spinal chakras. This row of lotus-petaled wheels of light, representing presumably important ganglia or plexi along the spinal cord, that through these there moves a mysterious power which is called the serpent power, and that this power, rising from the base of the spine, ascending through the various small nervous threads of the autonomic system, results in the activation of these chakras, and that by the activation of these chakras, certain internal areas of consciousness are opened or are intensified, carrying with them degrees of extra or supersensory perception and power. Now, this is a very big theme, and it is also a very intriguing one. But let us try to work with the subject just a little more carefully and with some considerable more specialization than we were able to do in our book, to see if we can find out more of what is intended. In almost all works, in fact all works, dealing with the chakras, these are represented in one way or another by symbolic figures. These figures are for the most part lotus form, distinguished by the number of petals. And each of these lotus forms carries within it certain other images and symbols. And on each of the lotus petals are various letters of the ancient Sanskrit, letters representing ideas, tones, energies, values of one kind or another, with which these chakras are specifically identified. There is no reasonable doubt in the world that the 7 chakras generally listed, although this number is arbitrary, there are some schools that maintain 5 and some 6, but that the number 7 should be associated with them probably has to do with ancient astronomy or a parallel thereto, inasmuch as the entire concept parallels very closely the monochord of Pythagoras, the single-stringed musical instrument, with the upper end of the string attached to the empyreum, or the sphere of the fixed stars, and the lower end of the string attached to the earth. Frets or stops were placed along the string to correspond to the orbits of the planets. And the so-called 3 inferior planets of the ancients, the Moon, Mercury, and Venus, were considered to be the lower part of this instrument. In the center, or the exact middle of the string, was placed the fret of the sun, by means of which the octave was achieved. Above the fret marking the sun's position were those of the 3 superior planets, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Thus this vertical thread placed, as Pythagoras placed it, between heaven and earth, and divided by 7 frets into intervals, became very similar in its general concept with that of the chakra system. For the heart chakra of the Kala chakra system corresponds to the sun, being the 4th from above and the 4th from below, both in the Pythagorean astronomy and in the Tantric yoga. Thus the heart chakra corresponds to the sun in the solar system, and above it are 3 superior planets, so-called, and below it the 3 inferior ones. In both systems also the distribution of the planets in relationship to meaning and in the significance of the chakras. This distribution is sufficiently parallel and close so that there are no glaring inconsistencies between the astrological theory and the yogic theory. The next point, perhaps, that we will want to mention or think about is the relationship between these chakras and the seals of the Book of Revelation. The 7 seals of Revelation certainly bear a striking symbolic content. For in each case, as the seal is opened, a vision or apocalyptical experience is unfolded. It is also quite possible that we have in this the key to the ancient concept of the octave, as Pythagoras developed it in music. For we remember that he was initiated in India at Elephanta and Ellora, and was therefore acquainted with the concept of the Brahmins and other Hindu sects of his time, which for these regarded the spinal cord as the string upon the Veena of Shiva, or the musical instrument of the world, and that therefore the mysterious harmony of the spheres of life and of death was played out upon this mysterious musical instrument, and the Veena is still shaped very much like the skull and the spinal cord together. Also we have the 7 churches in Asia, described in the epistles of Paul. And we have a series of septenaries, the 7 days of creation, the 7 primary elements of the alchemical transmutation, the 7 metals and the 7 priceless gems. We have many different septenaries of deities, and we also realize that in the Yoga Chakra system, the deities are imposed upon these chakras to create a vast complex of interrelated symbols. Let us bear one thing in mind, however, and that is that no one has ever seen any of these chakras physically. No one has ever been able to demonstrate conclusively that the symbolic forms in which they are presented to us have actually an equivalent in any extrasensory level of our substance or nature. This does not mean that the chakras do not necessarily have a superphysical existence, but that they do not resemble the diagrammatic form with which we associate them. In other words, it is not possible for us to see these lotus flowers as lotus flowers. It is not possible for us to count their petals and find a letter of the Sanskrit alphabet on each one of them. Nor is it possible for us to look inside of one of them and find the six-pointed star, nor is look inside of another and find an elephant with a white howdah on its back. These things we do not find when we look. We cannot find these forms. We do know, however, that these forms were created for a purpose, and that this purpose was undoubtedly and inevitably that each one of these so-called chakra forms is a mandala. That is, it is a meditation wheel. The purpose of the shape of the chakra is therefore to cause it to become a symbol of meditation. And it is meditation upon the symbol and the meaning of that symbol and the gradual internal experience of that symbol which is believed and held to be responsible for the opening of that particular chakra. Thus, the key to the opening of the chakras consists of a series of meditations, these meditations being fixed by the ancient systems of Raja Yoga. Also, it was held that if any method was used in the effort to unfold these chakras contrary to their rules, or that inadequate or incorrect techniques were used, a very serious detriment would result. That the individual would come into a very desperate situation. Now, actually, I think this particular phase of the subject has been a little exaggerated. And most of those who are thoroughly aware of Tantra are in agreement with this point, for the simple and single reason that the accidental or inadequate or incorrect development of these chakras is virtually impossible. In other words, it is almost inconceivable that a person unacquainted with the entire doctrine could cause these chakras to be agitated or affected in any appreciable way. Now, this takes the next point into consideration. Where are the chakras? The chakras were held to be in juxtaposition to a series of important centers of the human spine. That these chakras are therefore related intimately with certain gangliated areas, and that the contemplation of them was intended to be directed toward the areas in which they existed. The higher school of Tantra, however, makes a very interesting statement which we made in the book years ago, but did not greatly extend. Namely, that the chakras are actually all of them in the brain. And that what we call the spinal chakras are the reflexes of the brain chakras in the mirror of mind. That the neural system carries the reflexes into various parts of the body, but that the chakras themselves are in the 7 primary caves of the brain. Why do the